Today I'm going to be reading, The City of Ember. This works. The City of Ember. Trying to get to the first page. Okay, so this is the instructions. It's not a chapter, it's more of a background, but it's still really important to the story. When the City of Ember was just built and not yet inhabited, the chief builder and the assistant builder, both of them weary, sat down to speak of the future. They must not leave the city for at least 200 years, or perhaps 220. Is that long enough? Asked his assistant. It should be. We can't know for sure. And when the time comes, said the assistant, how will they know what to do? We'll provide them with instructions, of course, the chief builder replied. But who will keep the instructions? Who can we trust to keep them safe and secret all that time? The mayor of the city will keep the instructions, said the chief builder. We'll put them in a box with a time lock set to open on the proper date. And we will tell the mayor what's in the box? The assistant asked. No, just that it's information they won't need and must not see until the box opens of its own accord. So the first mayor will pass the box to the next mayor, and that one to the next, and so on down through the years. All of them keep it secret all that time. What else can we do? Asked the chief builder. Nothing about this endeavor is certain. There may be no one left in the city by then, or no safe place for them to come back to. So the first mayor of Ember was given the box, told to guard it carefully, and solemnly sworn to secrecy. When she grew old and her time as mayor was up, she explained about the box to her successor, who also kept the secret carefully. As to the next mayor, things went as planned for many years, but the seventh mayor of Ember was less honorable. Though the ones who come before him, than the ones that come before him, and more desperate. He was ill. He had the coughing sickness that was common in the city then, and thought the box might hold a secret that would save his life. He took it from its hiding place in the basement of the gathering hall and brought it home with him, where he attacked it with a hammer. But his strength was failing by then. All he managed to do was dent the lid a little, and before he could return the box to its official hiding place or tell his successor about it, he died. The box ended up at the back of a closet, shoved behind some old bags and bundles. There it sat, unnoticed, year after year, until its time arrived, and the lock quietly clicked open. Chapter 1. Assignment Day. In the City of Ember, the sky was always dark. The only light came from the great flood lamps mounted on the buildings and at the top of poles in the middle of the largest squares. When lights were on, they cast a yellowish glow over the streets, people walking by through long shadows that shortened and stretched out again. When the lights were off, as they were between 9 at night and 6 in the morning, the city was so dark that people might as well have been wearing blindfolds. Sometimes darkness fell in the middle of the day. The City of Ember was old, and everything in it, including the power lines, was in need of a prayer. So now and then the lights would flicker and go out. These were terrible moments for the people of Ember, as they came to a halt in the middle of the street or stood stock still in their houses, afraid to move in the utter blackness. They were reminded of something they preferred not to think about, that someday the lights of the city might go out and never come back on. Most of the time, life proceeded as it always has. Grown people did their work, and younger people, until they reached the age of 12, went to school. On the last day of their final year, which was called Assignment Day, they were given jobs to do. The graduating students occupied room 8 of the Ember School. On Assignment Day of the year 241, this classroom, usually noisy first thing in the morning, was completely silent. All 24 students sat upright and still at the desk. They had grown too big for. They were waiting. The desks were arranged in 4 rows of 6, one behind the other. In the last row sat a slender girl named Lena Mayfleet. She was winding a strand of her long dark hair around her finger, winding it and unwinding it again and again. Sometimes she plucked at a thread on her ragged cape, or bent over to pull on her socks, which were loose, intended to slide down around her ankles. One of her feet tapped the floor softly. In the second row was a boy named Dune Harrow. He sat with his shoulders hunched, his eyes squeezed shut in concentration, and his hands clasped tightly together. His hair looked rumpled, as if it hadn't been combed for a while. He had dark, thick eyebrows, which made him look serious at the best of times. And when he was anxious or angry, came together to form a straight line across his forehead. His brown corduroy jacket was so old that its ridges had flattened out. Both the girl and the boy were making urgent wishes. Dune's wish was very specific. He repeated it over and over again, his lips moving slightly, as if he could make it come true by saying it 1,000 times. Lena was making her wish in pictures rather than in words. In her mind's eye, she saw herself running through the streets of the city. In a red jacket, she made this picture as bright and real as she could. Lena looked up and gazed around the schoolroom. She said a silent goodbye to everything that had been familiar for so long. Goodbye to the map of the City of Ember in its sacred wooden frame, and the cabinet whose shelf held the book of numbers, the book of letters, and the book of the City of Ember. Goodbye to the cabinet drawers labeled new paper and old paper. Goodbye to the 3 electric lights in the ceiling that seemed always, no matter where you sat, to cast a shadow of your head over the page you were writing on. And goodbye to the teacher, Mrs. Thorne, who had finished her last day of school speech, wishing them luck in their lives they were about to begin. Now, having run out of things to say, she was standing at a desk with her frayed shawl clasped around her shoulders, and still the mayor, the guest of honor, had not arrived. Someone's foot scraped back and forth on the floor. Miss Thorne sighed, then the door rattled open, and the mayor walked in. He looked annoyed as though they were the ones that were late. "Welcome, Mayor Cole," said Miss Thorne, who held out her hand to him. The mayor made his mouth into a smile. "Miss Thorne," he said, enfolding her hand, "greetings another year." The mayor was a vast, heavy man, so big in the middle that his arms looked small and dangling. In one hand he held a little cloth bag. He lumbered to the front of the room and faced the students. His gray, drooping face appeared to be made of something stiffer than ordinary skin. It rarely moved except for making the smile that was now on it. "Young people," I mixed up people and smile. "Young people of the highest class," the mayor began. He stopped and scanned the room for several moments. His eyes seemed to look out from far back inside his head. He slowly nodded. "Assignment day, now isn't it? Yes, first we get our education, then we serve our city." Again, his eyes moved back and forth along the rows of students. Again, he nodded, as if someone had confirmed what he said. He put the little bag on Miss Thorne's desk and rested his hand on it. "What will that service be, eh? Perhaps you're wondering." He did his smile again, and his heavy cheeks folded like drapes. Lena's hands were cold. She wrapped her cape around her and pressed her hands between her knees. "Please hurry, Mr. Mayor," she said silently. "Please just let us choose and get it over with." Dune, in his mind, was saying the same thing, only he didn't say please. "Something to remember," the mayor said, holding up one finger. "Job you draw today is for 3 years. Then, evaluation. Are you at your job? Fine, you may keep it. Are you unsatisfactory? Is there growing need elsewhere? You'll be reassigned." "It is extremely important," he said, jabbing his finger at the class, "for all work of Ember to be done properly." He picked up the bag and pulled open the drawstring. "So let's begin. Simple procedure. Come up, one at a time. Reach into his bag. Take one slip of paper. Read it out loud." He smiled and nodded. The flesh under his chin bulged in and out. "Who cares to be the first?" No one moved. Lena stared down at the top of her desk. There was a long silence. Then Lizzie Biscoe, one of Lena's best friends, sprang to her feet. "I would like to be first," she said in her breathless, high voice. "Good. Walk forward." Lizzie went to stand before the mayor. Because of her orange hair, she looked like a bright spark next to him. Now choose. The mayor held out the bag with one hand and the other hand behind his back, as if to show he would not interfere. Lizzie reached into the bag and withdrew a tightly folded square of paper. She unfolded it carefully. Nina couldn't see the look on Lizzie's face, but she could hear the disappointment in her voice as she read out loud, "Supply depot clerk." "Very good," said the mayor. "A vital job." Lizzie trudged back to her desk. Lena smiled at her, but Lizzie made a sour face. Supply depot clerk wasn't a bad job, but it was a dull one. Supply depot clerk sat behind a long counter, took orders from the storekeepers Ember, and sent the carriers down to bring up what was wanted from the vast network of storerooms beneath Ember Street. The storerooms held supplies of every kind: canned food, clothes, furniture, blankets, light bulbs, medicine, pots and pans, reams of paper, soap, more light bulbs. Everything the people of Ember could possibly need. The clerk sat at the ledger books all day, recording the orders that came in and the goods that went out. Lizzie didn't like to sit still. She would have been better suited to something else, Lena thought. Messenger, maybe, the job Lena wanted for herself. Messengers ran through the city all day, going everywhere, seeing everything. "Next," said the mayor. This time 2 people stood up at once. Orly Gordon and Chet Nome. Orly quickly sat down again, and Chet approached the mayor. "Choose, young man," the mayor said. Chet chose. He unfolded his scrap of paper. "Electrician's helper," he read, and his wide face broke into a smile. Lena heard someone take a quick breath. She looked over to see Doom pressing a hand against his mouth. You never knew each year exactly which jobs would be offered. Some years there were several good jobs, like greenhouse helper, timekeeper assistant, or messenger, and no bad jobs at all. Other years, jobs like pipeworks laborer, trash shifter, and mold scraper were mixed in. But there would always be at least 1 or 2 jobs for electrician's helper. Fixing the electricity was the most important job in Ember, and more people worked at it than anything else. Orly Goring was next. She got the job of building repair assistant, which was a good job for Orly. She was a strong girl and liked hard work. Vindy Chance was made a greenhouse helper. She gave Lena a big grin as she went back to her seat. She'll get to work with Clary, Lena thought, lucky. So far, no one had picked a really bad job. Perhaps this year there would be no bad jobs at all. I lost my place. Okay, the idea gave her courage. Besides, she had reached a point where the suspense was giving her a stomachache. So as Vindy sat down, even before the mayor could say next, she stood up and stepped forward. The little bag was made of a faded green material, gathered at the top with a black string. Lena hesitated a moment, then put her hands inside and fingered the bits of paper, feeling as if she were stepping off a high building. She picked one. She unfolded it. The words were written in black ink and careful printing. "Pipeworks laborer," they said. She stared at them. "Out loud, please," the mayor said. "Pipeworks laborer," Lena said in a choked whisper. "Louder," said the mayor. "Pipeworks laborer," Lena said again. Her voice was loud and cracked. I'm going to try that again. I can do better with the voices. Pipeworks laborer. Louder, said the mayor. "Pipeworks laborer," Lena said again, her voice loud and cracked. There was a sigh of sympathy from the class. Keeping her eyes on the floor, Lena went back to her desk and sat down. Pipeworks laborers worked below the storerooms, in the deep labyrinth of tunnels that contained Ember's water and sewer pipes. Spent their days stopping up leaks and replacing pipe joints. It was wet, cold work. It could even be dangerous. A swift underground river ran through the pipeworks, and every now and then someone fell into it and was lost. People were occasionally lost in the tunnels too, if they strayed too far. Lena stared miserably down at the letter B someone had scratched into her desktop long ago. Almost anything would have been better than pipeworks laborer. Greenhouse helper had been her second choice. She imagined, with the long warmth warm air, and earthy smell of the greenhouse, where she could have worked with Clary, the greenhouse manager, someone she'd known all her life. She would have been content as a doctor's assistant, too, binding up cuts and bones. Even street sweeper or cart puller would have been better. At least then she would have stayed above ground with space and people around her. She had thought about going into pipeworks must be like being buried alive. One by one, the other students chose a job. None of them got such a wretched job as hers. Finally, the last person rose from his chair and walked forward. It was Dune. His dark eyebrows were drawn together in a frown of concentration. His hands, Lena saw, were clenched into fists at his sides. Dune reached into the bag and took out the last scrap of paper. He paused a minute, pressing it slightly into his hand. Pressing it tightly in his hand. "Go on," said the mayor. "Read." Unfolding the paper, Dune read, "Messenger." He scowled, crumpled the paper, and dashed it to the floor. Lena gasped. The whole class rustled in surprise. Why would anyone be angry to get the job of messenger? "Bad behavior," cried the mayor. His eyes bulged and his skin darkened. "Go to your seat immediately." June kicked the crumpled paper into the corner where he stalked back to his desk and flung himself down. The mayor took a short breath and blinked furiously. "Disgraceful," he said, glaring at Dune. "A childish display of temper. Students should be glad to work for their city. Ember will prosper if all citizens do their best." He held up a stern finger. As he said this and moved his eyes slowly from one face to another, suddenly Dune spoke up. "But Ember's not prospering," he cried. "Everything is getting worse and worse." "Silence," said the mayor. "The blackouts!" cried Dune. He jumped from his seat. "The lights go out all the time now, and there are shortages. There are shortages of everything. If no one does anything about it, something terrible is going to happen." Lena listened with a pounding heart. Where did I get Luna from? What was wrong with Dune? Why was he so upset? He was taking things too seriously, as he always did. Miss Thorne strode to Dune and put a hand on his shoulder. "Sit down now," she said quietly, but Dune remained standing. The mayor glared. For a few moments he said nothing. Then he smiled, showing a neat row of gray teeth. "Miss Thorne," he said, "who might this young man be?" "I am Dune Harrow," said Dune. "I will remember you," said the mayor. He gave Dune a long look, then turned to the class and smiled his smile again. "Congratulations to you all," he said. "Welcome to Ember's workforce, Miss Thorne. Class, thank you." The mayor shook hands with Miss Thorne and departed. The students gathered their coats and caps and filed out of the classroom. Lena walked down the wide hallway with Lizzie, who said, "Poor you, I thought I picked a bad one, but you got the worst. I feel lucky compared to you." Once they were out the door, Lizzie said goodbye and scurried away as if Lena's bad luck were a disease she might catch. Lena stood on the steps for a moment and gazed across Harkin Square where people walked briskly, bundled up cozily in their coats and scarves, or talked to one another in the pools of light beneath the great street lamps. A boy in a red messenger's jacket ran toward the gathering hall. On Otterwheel Street, a man pulled a cart filled with sacks of potatoes, and in the buildings all around the square, rows of light-headed windows shone bright yellow and deep gold. Lena sighed. This was where she wanted to be, up here where everything happened, not down on the ground. Someone tapped on her shoulder. Startled, she turned around and saw Doom behind her. His thin face looked pale. "Will you trade with me?" he asked. "Trade? Trade jobs. I don't want to waste my time being a messenger. I want to help save the city, not run around carrying gossip." Lena gaped at him. "You'd rather be in the pipeworks?" "Electrician's helper is what I wanted," Dune said. "But Chet won't trade, of course. Pipeworks is second best." "But why?" "'Cause the generator's in the pipeworks," said Dune. Lena knew about the generator, of course. In some mysterious ways, it turned the running of the river into power for the city. You could feel its deep rumble when you stood in Plumber Square. "I need to see the generator," Dune said. I have ideas about it." He thrust his hands into his pockets. "So," he said, "will you trade?" "Yes," cried Lena. "Messenger is a job I want most, and not a useless job at all." In her opinion, people couldn't be expected to trudge halfway across the city every time they want to communicate with someone. Messengers connected everyone to everyone else. Anyways, whether it was important or not, the job of messenger just happened to be perfect for Lena. She loved to run. She could run forever, and she loved exploring every nook and cranny of the city, which was what a messenger got to do. "All right, then," said Dune. He handed her his crumpled piece of paper, which he must have retrieved from the floor. Lena reached into her pocket, pulled out her slip of paper, and handed it to him. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," said Lena. Happiness sprang up in her, and happiness always made her want to run. She took the steps 3 at a time and sped down Broad Street towards home. Chapter 2. A Message to the Mayor. Lena often took different routes between school and home, sometimes just for variety. She'd go all the way around Sparks Swallow Square, or way up by the shoe repair shops on Livery Street. But today she took the shortest route because she was eager to get home and tell her news. She ran fast and easily through the streets of Ember. Every corner, every alley, every building was familiar to her. She always knew where she was. Though most streets looked more or less the same, all of them were lined with old two-story stone buildings. The wood of their window frames and doors long unpainted. On the street level were shops. Above the shops were apartments where people lived. Every building at the place where the wall met the roof was equipped with a row of floodlights, big cone-shaped lamps that cast a strong yellow glare. Stone walls, lighted windows, lumpy, muffled shapes of people. Lena flew by them. Her slender legs felt immensely strong, like the wood of a bow that flexes and springs. She darted around obstacles, broken furniture left for the trash heaps or for scavengers, stoves and refrigerators that were past repair, peddlers sitting on the pavement with their wares spread out around them. She leapt over cracks and potholes. When she came to Hafter Street, she slowed a little. The street was deep in shadow. 4 of its street lamps were out and had not been fixed. For a second, Lena thought of a rumor she heard about the light bulbs, that some kinds were completely gone. She was used to shortages of things. Everyone was. But not of light bulbs. If the light bulbs for the street lamps ran out, the only lights would be inside the buildings. What would happen then? How could people find their way through the streets in the dark? Somewhere inside her, a black worm of dread stirred. She thought about Dune's outburst in class. Could things really be as bad as he said? She didn't want to believe it. She pushed the thought away. As she turned on to Budlow Street, she sped up again. She passed a line of customers waiting to get into the vegetable market, their shopping bags draped over their arms. At the corner of Oliver Street, she dodged a group of washers trudging along with bags of laundry, and some movers carrying away a broken table. She passed a street sweeper, shoving dust around with his broom. "I'm so lucky," she thought, "to have the job I want, because of Dune Harrow of all people." When they were young, Lena and Dune had been friends. Together, they had explored the back alleys and dimly lit edges of the city. But in their 4th year of school, they had begun to grow apart. It started one day during the hour of free time, when the children in the class were playing on the front steps of the school. "I can go down 3 steps at a time," someone would boast. "I can hop down on 1 foot," someone else would say. The others would chime in. "I can do a handstand against a pillar. I can leapfrog over the trash can." As soon as one child did something, all the rest would do it to prove they could. Lena could do it all, even when the dares got wilder. She yelled out the wildest one of all. "I can climb the light pole." For a second, everyone just stared at her, but Lena dashed across the street, took off her shoes and socks, and wrapped herself around the cold metal of the pole. Pushing with her bare feet, she inched upward. She didn't get very far before she lost her grip and fell back down. The children laughed, and so did she. I didn't say I'd climb to the top, she explained. I just said I'd climb it. The others swarmed forth to try. Lizzie wouldn't take off her socks. Her feet were too cold, she said. So she kept sliding back. 40 Pen wasn't strong enough to get more than a foot off the ground. Next came Dune. He took his shoes and socks off and placed them neatly at the foot of the pole. And then he announced in his serious way, I'm going to the top. He clasped the pole and started upwards, pushing with his feet, his knees sticking out to the sides. He pushed himself upwards, pushed again. He was now higher than Lena had been. But suddenly his hand slid, and he came plummeting down. He landed on his palm with his legs poking up in the air. Lena laughed. She shouldn't have. He might have been hurt. But he looked so funny that she couldn't help it. He wasn't hurt. He could have jumped up, grinned, and walked away, but Dune didn't take things lightly. When he heard Lena and the others laughing, his face darkened. His temper rose in him like water. Don't you dare laugh at me, he said to Lena. I did better than you did. That was a stupid idea anyway. A stupid idea to climb that pole. And as he was shouting right in the face, their teacher, Miss Polster, came out onto the steps and saw him. She took him by the shirt collar to the school director's office, where he got a scolding he didn't think he deserved. After that day, Lena and Dune barely looked at each other when they passed in the hallway. At first, it was because they were fuming about what had happened. Dune didn't like being laughed at. Lena didn't like being shouted at. After a while, the memory of the light pole incident faded, but they had both gone off the habit of friendship. By the time they were 12, they knew each other only as classmates. Lena was friends with Windy Chance, Orly Goring, and most of all, red-haired Lizzie Biscoe, who could run almost as fast as Lena and could talk 3 times faster. Now, as Lena sped towards home, she felt immensely grateful to Dune, as she'd hoped he'd come to no harm in the pipeworks. Maybe they'd be friends again. She'd like to ask him about the pipeworks. She was curious about it. When she got to Greystone Street, she passed Clary Lane, who was probably on her way to the greenhouses. Clary waved to her and called out, "What job?" And Lena called back, "Messenger," and ran on. Lena lived in Quilliam Square, over the yarn shop run by her grandmother. When she got to the shop, she burst in the door and cried, "Granny, I'm a messenger." Granny's shop had once been a tiny place where each ball of yarn and spool of thread had its spot in its cubby's holes that lined the walls, and all of the yarn and thread that came from old clothes that had gone too shabby to be worn. Granny had raveled sweaters and picked apart dresses and jackets and pants. She wound the yarn into bowls and the thread onto spools. And people bought them to use in making new clothing. These days, the shop was a mess. Long loops and strands of yarn dangled out of the cubby's holes, and the brown and grays and purples were mixed in with the orchards and olive greens and dark blues. Granny's customers often had to spend half an hour unsnarling the rust red yarn from the mud brown, or trying to fish out the end of a thread from a tangled wad. Granny wasn't much help. Most days she just chose behind the counter in her rocking chair. That's where she was when Lena burst in with her news. Lena saw that Granny had forgotten to gnaw up her hair in the morning. It was standing out from her head in a wide white frizz. Granny stood up, looking puzzled. "You aren't a messenger, dear. You're a schoolgirl," she said. "But, Granny, today was assignment day. I got my job and I'm a messenger." Granny's eyes lit up, and she slapped her hand down the counter. "I remember," she cried. "Messenger, that's a grand job. You'll be good at it." Lena's little sister toddled out from behind the counter on unsteady legs. She had a round face and round brown eyes. At the top of her head was a spring of brown hair tied up with a scrap of red yarn. She grabbed onto Lena's knees. Lena, she said. Lena bent over and took the child's hand. "Poppy, your big sister got a good job. Are you happy, Poppy? Are you proud of me?" Poppy said something that sounded like Hoppy, Hoppy, Hoppy. Lena laughed, hoisted her up, and danced with her around the shop. Lena loved her little sister so much that it was like an ache under her ribs. The baby and Granny were all the family she had now. 2 years ago, when the coffin sickness was raging through the city again, her father had died. Some months later, her mother, giving birth to Poppy, had died too. Lena missed her parents with an ache that was as strong as what she felt for Poppy, only it was a hollow feeling instead of a full one. "When do you start?" asked Granny. "Tomorrow," said Lena. "I report to the messenger station at 8 o'clock. "You'll be a famous messenger," said Granny. "Fast and famous." Taking Poppy with her, Lena went out of the shop and climbed the stairs to their apartment. It was a small apartment, only 4 rooms, but there was enough stuff in it to fill 20. There were things that belonged to Lena's parents, her grandparents, and even their grandparents. Old, broken, cracked, threadbare things that had been patched and repaired dozens or hundreds of times. People of Ember rarely threw anything away. They made the best possible use of what they had. In Lena's apartment, layers of worn rugs and carpets covered the floor, making it soft but uneven underfoot. Against one wall stood a sagging couch with round wooden balls for legs. And on the couch were blankets and pillows, so many that you had to toss them on the floor before you could sit down. Against the opposite wall stood 2 wobbly tables that held a clutter of plates and bottles, cups and bowls, unmatching forks and spoons, little piles of scrap paper, bits of strings round up in untidy wads, and a few stubby pencils. There were 4 lamps, 2 tall ones that stood on the ceiling. 2 tall ones that stood on the floor, and 2 short ones that stood on the tables. And in uneven lines up near the ceiling were hooks that held coats and shawls and nightgowns and sweaters, shelves that held pots and pans, jars with unreadable labels, and boxes of buttons and pins and tacks. Where there were no shelves, the walls had been decorated with things of beauty. A label from a can of peaches, a few dried yellow squash flowers, a strip of faded but still pretty purple cloth. There were drawings, too. Lena had done the drawings out of her imagination. They showed a city that looked somewhat like Ember, except its buildings were lighter and taller and had more windows. One of the drawings had fallen to the floor. Lena retrieved it and pinned it back up. She stood for a minute and looked at the pictures. Over and over, she had drawn the same city. Sometimes she drew it as seen from afar. Sometimes she drew it. She chose one of its buildings and drew it in detail. She put in stairways and street lamps and carts. Sometimes she tried to draw the people who lived in the city, though she wasn't good at drawing people. Their heads always came out too small, and their hands looked like spiders. One picture showed a scene in which the people of the city greeted her when she arrived. The first person they had ever seen to come from somewhere else. They argued with each other about who should be the first to invite her home. Lena could see this city so clearly in her mind. She almost believed it was real. She knew it couldn't be, though the book of the City of Ember, which all children studied in school, taught otherwise. The City of Ember was made for us long ago by the builders, the book said. It is the only light in the dark world. Beyond Ember, the darkness goes on forever in all directions. Leah had been to the outer border of Ember. She had stood at the edge of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness beyond the sea, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned. And no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either. As far as anyone knew, the darkness did go on forever. Still, Lena wanted the other city to exist. In her imagination, it was so beautiful. It seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. But she wasn't thinking about the other city now. Today, she was happy to be right where she was. She set Poppy on the couch. "Wait there," she said. She went into the kitchen where there was an electric stove, a refrigerator that no longer worked, and was used to store glasses and dishes so Poppy couldn't get at them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, and a wind-up clock that Granny always forgot to wind, and a long row of cans. Lena tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she could find what she wanted quickly, but Granny always messed them up. Now she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled baby drink and a jar of boiled carrots, opened them, poured the liquid into a cup and the carrots into a little dish, and took them back to the baby on the couch. Poppy dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of her carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For the moment, Lena felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow, she'd be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off Poppy's face. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be all right." The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lee arrived the next morning, she was greeted by Messenger Captain Alice Fleris, a bony woman with pale eyes and hair the color of dust. "Our new girl," said the captain to the other messengers, a cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lena. "I have your jacket right here," said the captain, who handed Lena a red jacket like the ones all messengers wear. It was only a little too large. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came a deep, reverberating bong. "8 o'clock!" cried Captain Flurry. She waved a long arm. "Take your stations." As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lena. "Your stations," she said, "is Garden Square." Lena nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by her collar. "I haven't told you the rules," she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. A customer gives you a message. Repeat back to make sure you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you have to take it. Lena nodded. "I always go fast," she said. 4. The captain went on. "Deliver message only to the people it's meant for, no one else." Lena nodded again. She bounced a little on her toes, eager to get going. Captain Flurry smiled. "Go," she said, and Lena was off. She felt strong and speedy and sure-footed. She glanced at her reflection as she ran past the window of a furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long dark hair flying out behind her, her long legs in their black socks, and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which had never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she looked so happy. As soon as she came into Garden Square, a voice cried, "Messenger!" Her first customer. It was old Natty Prine, calling to her from the bench where he always sat. "This goes to Ravenette Parsons, 18 Silverton Square," he said. "Bend down." She bent down so that her ear was close to his whispering mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, "My stove is broke. Don't come for dinner. Repeat." Lena repeated the message. "Good," said Natty Prine. He gave Lena 20 cents, and she ran across the street to Silverton Square, where she found Ravenette Parsons also sitting on a bench. She recited the message to him. "Old turnip head," he growled. "Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't feel like cooking." No reply. Lena ran back to Garden Square, passing a group of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. It seemed to Lena there were more believers than ever these days. What they believed in she didn't know, but it must make them happy. They were always smiling. The next customer turned out to be Miss Polster, the teacher of the 4th-year class. In Miss Polster's class, they memorized pages from the book of the City of Ember. Every week, Miss Polster had charts on the wall for everything, with everyone's name listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. "What you need to learn, children," she always said, in her resonant, precise voice, "is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference," here she would stop and point to the class would finish the sentence, "you must always choose the right." In every situation, Miss Polster always knew what the right choice was. Now, he was Miss Polster again, looming over Lena and pronouncing her message. "To any set Lefron, 39 Hum Street, as follows," she said. "My confidence as you has been seriously diminished since I heard about the disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last. Please repeat." It took Lena 3 tries to get this right. Uh-oh, a red dot for me, she said. Miss Poster did not seem to find this amusing. Lena had 19 customers the first morning. Some of them had ordinary messages. I can't come on Tuesday. Buy a pound of potatoes on your way home. Please come and fix my front door. Others had messages that made no sense to her at all, like Miss Poster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was the messages, but wasn't the messages, but the places she got to go. Wait, she could go into the house of people she didn't know, and hidden alleyways and a few rooms in the back of stores. In just a few hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Mrs. Sample, the mender, had to sleep on her couch because her entire bedroom, almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Felina Tower had the skeleton of a person hanging against her living room wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. I study it, she said when she saw Lena staring. I have to know how people are put together. At a house on Caillou Street, Lena delivered a message to a worried-looking man whose living room was completely dark. I'm saving on light bulbs, the man said. And when Lena took a message to the Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days the back room was used as a meeting place for people who like to converse about a great subject. Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time? She heard someone ask. Perhaps, answered someone else. There was a long silence. Okay. There was a long silence, and then again, perhaps not. All of it was interesting. She loved finding things out. She loved running, and even by the end of the day, she wasn't tired. Running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them the good news they so desperately wanted to hear. Late in the afternoon, a young man came up to her, walking with a sort of sideways lurch. He was an odd-looking person. He had a very long neck with a bump in the middle, and the teeth so big they looked as if they were trying to escape from his mouth. His black bushy hair stuck out from his head in untidy tufts. I have a message for the mayor at the gathering hall, he said. He paused to let the importance of this be understood. The mayor, he said. Did you get that? I got it, said Lena. All right, listen carefully. Tell him. Deliver at 8 from Looper. Repeat it back. Deliver at 8 from Looper. Lena repeated. It was an easy message. All right. No answer required. He handed her 20 cents, and she sprinted away. The gathering hall occupied one entire side of Harkin Square, which was the city's central plaza. The square was paved with stone. It had a few benches bolted to the ground, here and there, as well as a couple of kiosks for notices. Wide steps led up to the gathering hall, and fat columns framed its big door. The mayor's office was in the gathering hall. So were the offices of the clerks who kept track of which buildings had broken windows, what street lamps needed repair, and the number of people in the city. There was the office of the timekeeper, who was in charge of the town clock, and there were offices for the guards who enforced the laws of Ember, now and then putting pickpockets or people who got into fights in the prison room. A small one-story structure with a sloping roof that jutted out from one side of the building. Lena ran up the steps and through the door into a broad hallway. On the left was a desk, and at the desk sat a guard. Barton Snow, assistant guard, said a badge on his chest. He was a big man with wide shoulders, brawny arms, and a thick neck. But his head looked as if it didn't belong to his body. It was small and round and topped with a fuzz of extremely short hair. His lower jaw jutted out and moved a little from side to side, as if he were chewing on something. When he saw Lena, his jaw stopped moving for a moment. His lips curled into a very small smile. Good day, he said. What business brings you here today? I have a message for the mayor. Very good, very good. Barton Snow heaved himself to his feet. Step this way. He led Lena down the corridor and opened a door marked reception room. Wait here, please, he said. The mayor is in his basement office on private business, but he will be up shortly. Lena went inside. I'll notify the mayor, said Barton Snow. Please have a seat. The mayor will be right with you, or pretty soon. He left, closing the door behind him. A second later, the door opened again, and the guard's small fuzzy head reappeared. What is the message? Yes, I have to give it to the mayor in person, said Lena. Of course, of course. said the guard. The door closed again. He didn't seem very sure about things, Lena thought. Maybe he's new at his job. The reception room was shabby, but Lena could tell it had once been impressive. The walls were dark red with brownish patches where the paint was peeling away. And the right-hand wall was a closed door. An ugly brown carpet lay on the floor, and on it stood a large armchair covered in an itchy-looking red material, and several smaller chairs. A small table held a teapot and the cups. A larger table in the middle of the room displayed a copy of the book of the City of Ember, lying open as if someone were going to read from it. Portraits of all the mayor of a city since the beginning of time hung on the walls, staring solemnly from behind the panes of old window glass. Lena sat in the big armchair and waited. No one came. She got up and wandered around the room. She bent over the book of the City of Ember and read a few sentences. The citizens of Ember may not have luxuries, but the foresight of the builders who filled the storerooms at the beginning of the time has ensured that they will always have enough, and enough is all that a person of wisdom needs. She flipped a few pages. The gathering hall clock, she read, measures the hour of night and day. It must never be allowed to run down. Without it, how would we know when to go to work and when to go to school? How would the light director know when to turn the lights on and when to turn them off again? It's the job of the timekeeper to wind the clock every week and to place the date sign in Harkin Square every day. The timekeeper must perform these duties faithfully. Lena knew that not all timekeepers were as faithful as they should be. She heard of one some years ago who forgot to change the date sign, so that it might say Wednesday, week 38, year 227, for several days in a row. There had even been timekeepers who forgot to wind the clock, so it might stand at noon or at midnight for hours at a time, causing a very long day or a very long night. The result was that no one really knew anymore exactly what day of the week it was or exactly how many years it had been since the building of the city. They called this the year 241, but it might have been 245 or 239 or 250. As long as the clock's deep boom rang out every hour and the lights went on and off more or less regularly, it didn't seem to matter. Lena left the book and examined the pictures of the mayor. The 7th mayor, Pod Moroswart, was her great, she didn't know how many grades, grandfather. He looked quite dreary, Lena thought. His cheeks were long and hollow, his mouth turned down at the corners. There was a lost look in his eyes. The picture she liked best was of the 4th mayor, Jane Larkett, who had a serene smile and fuzzy black hair. Since no one came, she heard no sounds from the hallway. Maybe they'd forgotten her. Lena went over to the closed door in the right-hand wall. She pulled it open and saw stairs going up. Maybe while she waited, she would just see where they went. She started upwards. At the top of the first flight was a closed door. Carefully, she opened it. She saw another hallway and more closed doors. She shut the door and kept going. Her footsteps sounded loud on the way, and she was afraid someone might hear her and come and scold her. No doubt she was not supposed to be here, but no one came, and she climbed on, passing another closed door. The gathering hall was the only building in Ember with 3 stories. She had always wanted to stand on its roof and look out at the city. Maybe from there it would be possible to see beyond the sea, into the unknown regions. If the bright city of her drawings really did exist, it would be out there somewhere. At the top of the stairs, she came to a door marked roofed. She pushed it open. Chilly air brushed against her skin. She was outside. Ahead of her was a flat gravel surface. About 10 paces away, she could see the high wall of the clock tower. She went to the edge of the roof. From there, she could see the whole of Ember. Directly below was Harkin Square, where people were moving this way and that, all of them appearing from this top-down view. More round and tall beyond Harkin Square. The lighted windows of the buildings made checkered lines, yellow and black row after row. In all directions, she tried to see farther across the unknown regions, but she couldn't. At the edges of the city, the lights were so far away that they made a kind of haze. She could see nothing beyond them but blackness. She heard someone shout from the square below. "Look!" came a small but piercing voice. "Someone on the roof!" She saw a few people stop and look up. "Who is it? What's she doing up there?" someone cried. More people gathered until a crowd was standing on the steps of the gathering hall. They see me, Lena thought, and it made her laugh. She waved at the crowd and did a few steps from the Bugfoot scurry dance, which she learned on the clothing square dance, and they laughed and shouted some more. Then the door behind her burst open, and a huge guard with a bushy black beard was suddenly running towards her. "Halt!" he shouted, though she wasn't going anywhere. He grabbed her by the arm. "What are you doing here?" "I was just curious," said Lena, in her most innocent voice. "I want to see the city from the roof." She read the guard's name badge. It was Reg Stabmark, Chief Guard. "Curiosity leads to trouble," said Reg Stabmark. He peered down at the crowd. "You've caused a commotion." He pulled her towards the door and hustled her down all 3 flights of stairs. I just got an ad. When they came into the waiting room, Barnes Snowd was standing there looking flustered, his jaw twitching side to side. Next to him was the mayor. "A child causing trouble, Mayor Cole," said the chief guard. The mayor glared at her. "I recall your face from assignment day. Shame disgracing yourself in your new job." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," said Lena. "I was looking for you so I could deliver a message." "Shall we put her in the prison room for a day or two?" asked the chief guard. The mayor frowned. He pondered a moment. "What's the message?" he said. He bent out so Leah could speak into his ear. She noticed that he smelled a little bit like overcooked turnips. "Deliver it, Lena whispered. "From Looper." The mayor smiled, a tight little smile. He turned to the guard. "Just a child's antics," he said. We'll let it go this time. From now on," he said to Lena. "Behave yourself." "Yes, Mr. Mayor," said Lena. "And you," said the mayor, turning to the assistant guard and shaking a thick finger at him, "watch visitors much more carefully." Barnes Snowd blinked and nodded. Lena ran for the door. Outside, the small crowd was still standing by the steps. A few of them cheered as Lena came out. Others frowned at her and muttered words like mischief and silliness. And show off. Lena felt embarrassed suddenly. She hadn't meant to show off. She hurried past out into Otter Whale Street and started to run. She didn't see Dune, who was among those people watching her. He had been on his way home from his first day in the pipeworks when he'd come across a cluster of people gazing up at the roof of the gathering hall laughing. He was tired and chilly. The bottom of his pants legs were wet, and mud clung to his shoes and smeared his hands. Where he raised his hands and saw the small figure next to the clock tower, he realized right away it was Lena. He saw her raise her arm and wave and hop around, and for a second he wondered what it would be like to be up there, looking out over the whole city, laughing and waving. When Lena came down, he wanted to speak to her, but he knew he was filthy looking and that she would ask him questions he didn't want to answer, so he turned away, walking fast, and headed for home. Chapter 3, Under Ember. I will read this chapter and then chapter 4 in the next video. Bye.